Just moving on to the big picture now, the economy. We seem to hit a bit of a pothole this week, economically speaking. The economy is still growing, but not as fast as expected. Unemployment is low, but edged up, and China came off the boil, forecasting slower growth there than in about 8 years. So it's all looking a bit soft around the place, isn't it?
Yeah, look, I actually think we don't have a two-speed economy in this country. We have a one-cylinder economy. It's dependent on China fueling it. And if that starts to slow down, if we find iron ore starts to build up on docks in China and the steel mills slow down in China, then what we're going to find is the iron ore price is going to drop, the appetite for taking on new projects will drop. I appreciate that you'll get greater volume if the price of iron ore drops, but you'll end up in a situation where we have a no-cylinder economy running, and the companies like BHP and Rio are supplying more volume at lower prices, and they'll be in exactly the same predicament that Gerry Harvey was complaining about last year, where he has to sell more plasma TVs at a lower price point to make the same amount of money, and that's going to be difficult for Australia.
But this is a different kind of cycle, isn't it? I mean, given the size and depth
absolutely.
of the credit crisis.
We're not looking at, globally, we're not looking at a normal recession here where you can lower interest rates and spur economic activity again. What we're looking at here is a deleveraging, where individuals, companies and countries have to get out from under a huge debt burden before they've got any appetite. And that's why we're seeing quantitative easing across the world. That's why we're seeing money being printed. Because if you can't lower rates to spur activity, you just hand people money and see if that'll work. Problem is, it's not finding its way into the economy. And the reason it's not finding its way into the economy is because we've got these zombie banks that were supported and they didn't have to write down their bad debts, and they're hoarding the money, and it's not getting out to where people need it.
Well, the European Central Bank lent out about 700 billion
€714
last week, and then 500 billion of it went straight back into the European Central Bank.
But that was the same day, that was the 1st of March, it was the same day that Ben Bernanke said quantitative easing is done now. You know, and where does that money come from? The ECB's money comes from the IMF. The IMF gets it from the Federal Reserve through a swap. So you know,
it's a round robin.
Absolutely. You know, and look, I actually think that longer term, let me say this: I think it's going to take years to get out of this predicament. If we've got very low rates of economic growth, if we overlay the business cycle, if we don't get more frequent recessions, we're going to have more frequent fears of a recession.
Bringing it back home to the Australian market, if you look at those GDP numbers we had for the latest quarter, New South Wales and Victoria are already in a recession.
Yeah.
And of course, what we have is the federal government still promising a budget surplus this year, virtually guaranteeing it, and the Treasurer is trying to bring down this budget back into surplus next year. Here's Wayne Swan after the national accounts figures were released this week.
I fear that there will be less revenue. This is going to make that task harder, but we think we absolutely need to do it given the circumstances.
Well, they absolutely cannot afford.
We can absolutely.
They cannot afford, given the politically, they can't afford to.
No, they can't afford not to. But boy, it'll be slim. It will be the slimmest of surpluses if they get it in. And of course, they're under
$1
such...
a do.
Yeah, that's
$1.
Right.
Are there any assets left to sell?
Nothing left to sell. And of course, the corporate profits are going down. The revenue they're getting from corporate or from the mining companies' profitability is just going. It's not going anywhere.
The interesting thing that you know the big payers of tax in Australia, the larger companies, their profits haven't been growing through this recent reporting season. That's what I've certainly seen.
No,
it's not the big companies that have been growing profits; it's the smaller ones. So the aggregate tax take is going to be less.
Oh, absolutely.